Every civilization leaves a door someone forgot to open. This is case file number 10. We leave Supe Valley's famous rectangular pyramids behind and travel east along the coastal plain, where a different kind of architectural statement waits near modern-day Aspero. Unlike the stepped structures built inland for ceremonial processions or burial rites found in earlier cases, this site presents a singular anomaly: a massive, perfectly round earthen mound rising abruptly from the flat desert floor. It stands isolated among smaller conical hills and rectangular platforms that hint at its unique function within the broader Caral Supe civilization context. The geometry here defies local convention. While neighboring settlements prioritize linear axes aligned with cardinal directions or specific celestial events through their pyramid staircases, Aspero's central platform lacks any visible ramp access from below during excavation surveys. Instead of a towering apex pointing heavenward like its counterparts in the Andes, this structure forms a complete circle, potentially representing a horizon marker rather than a mountain mimicry. Some researchers speculate that its circular form was intentional, designed not to climb but to observe surrounding land and sea horizons without obstruction, serving as an ancient lighthouse or navigational beacon for vessels departing from these early harbors. Buried beneath layers of sand and time, the platform retains evidence of sophisticated drainage systems indicating it functioned within a thriving coastal ecosystem rather than solely in arid hinterlands. Carbon dating confirms its construction predates known Sumerian cities by centuries. Yet the technology required to engineer such a precise circular foundation remains distinct from Andean traditions. While no definitive inscription explains the purpose behind this round geometry, the sheer scale suggests it held profound symbolic weight for a society that understood both terrestrial engineering and maritime navigation simultaneously. As we pull back the curtain on this forgotten door, the silence of the mound speaks volumes about a culture that looked out toward infinity instead of upward into the stars. The journey from Caral to Aspero represents a fundamental shift in how we understand early Andean civilization, moving away from the monumental architecture of the inland highlands toward the tidal rhythms of the coast. While Caral dazzles with its tiered pyramids and ball courts, the world at the mouth of the Supe River was defined by something far more resilient: a deep connection to the sea. This settlement did not arise in isolation. Rather, it stands as tangible proof that during the 3rd millennium BCE, disparate communities were linked by trade routes and shared knowledge, forming an interconnected network across thousands of miles before the concept of globalization existed. As we navigate toward where modern-day Caral once stood, the landscape reveals itself through a lens of ancient adaptation. The residents here engineer their lives around rising tides that would have swallowed less prepared settlements whole, constructing dwellings on stilts and creating causeways to manage the dynamic shoreline. This was not merely a place of habitation, but a sophisticated hub where marine resources were harvested with an intensity that allowed for urban density comparable to contemporary cities in Mesopotamia or Egypt. The sheer volume of fish bones found within these ruins suggests a population sustained by a diet rich enough to support complex social structures, challenging the notion that early American civilizations relied solely on agriculture. Yet, as we stand before this coastal antiquity, an undercurrent of mystery persists regarding its eventual fate. We know from later historical records that Aspero was eventually abandoned and replaced by colonial fortifications, but the precise mechanism of its decline remains obscured in time. Some researchers speculate that shifting sandbars, or perhaps a changing climate, altered the river's mouth, rendering this vital fishing ground unstable for future generations. Regardless of whether environmental forces or human conflict sealed its destiny, Aspero reminds us that our ancestors were not passive observers of their environment but active architects who built enduring societies upon water and wind alone, leaving behind a legacy as submerged yet significant as the ruins themselves, waiting to be unearthed once more. As you drift toward the coast of Supe Valley, the landscape shifts dramatically from the inland fertility to a harsher seaside environment that demands architectural ingenuity. Unlike the massive rectangular mounds found at Caral, which served as broad ceremonial centers for hundreds or thousands of people, Aspero presents us with something far more singular and enigmatic: perfectly circular platforms rising directly from the sand. These are not mere copies scaled down to fit a different terrain. They represent a distinct evolution in engineering philosophy where the very shape was chosen over convenience. The Huaca de los Ídolos stands as one of these massive rings, its perimeter clearly defined by layers of stone and adobe that defy the standard orthogonal planning seen elsewhere in pre-Columbian South America. The distinction becomes even more striking when examining the smaller neighboring structures like the Huaca de los Sacrificios. While Caral's layout suggests a sprawling urban grid designed for communal gathering, Aspero's circular forms imply specialized functions entirely separate from simple habitation or general ritual space. Some researchers speculate that these round shapes were engineered specifically to accommodate distinct ceremonial processes or social hierarchies that required isolation rather than aggregation. The deliberate deviation from the ubiquitous rectangular form found across the continent suggests a conscious decision by their builders to create spaces that operated on different principles, perhaps acting as unique focal points for coastal traditions that diverge sharply from the Andean highlands behind them. There is an inherent quietness in these circular forms that feels almost unnatural within the context of traditional mound building. The smooth curvature creates a silhouette against the horizon that does not simply reflect utility or population density, but communicates intent through geometry itself. Unlike the imposing, block-like presence of Caral, which commands respect through sheer mass and rectangular order, Aspero's round platforms seem to invite observation while maintaining an enigmatic distance. This architectural choice implies a society capable of abstract thinking regarding space and function long before contact with outside forces altered their worldview, standing as silent witnesses to rituals that played out within walls curved just so by design rather than accident. Unlike the great river valleys of Egypt and Mesopotamia, where civilization rose upon the fertile banks of grain-producing soil, Aspero stood as a startling exception in an ancient world defined by agriculture. While neighbors harvested maize and squash to fuel their populations, this settlement on the Supe Delta relied almost entirely on a different kind of sustenance. The cold currents of the Pacific Ocean brought rich abundances of anchovy and sardines ashore every year. Excavations reveal massive storage facilities designed not for sacks of flour or jars of dried beans, but specifically to house tons of preserved fish oil and salted seafood that could feed thousands during dry seasons when rains failed. This fundamental difference suggests a society whose very identity was woven from the tides rather than the harvest cycles of inland fields. The archaeological record paints a vivid picture of an economic engine driven by marine wealth, transforming what should have been a coastal fishing village into one of South America's earliest urban centers. Researchers estimate that tens of thousands of fish were landed annually at Aspero alone during peak seasons, creating a surplus so substantial it necessitated complex distribution networks extending deep into the Peruvian interior. This was not merely about survival, it was about trade power. The valley floor became bustling with activity as merchants transported these protein-packed treasures inland in exchange for cotton textiles and other high-value goods produced by non-coastal communities. It illustrates a sophisticated barter system where fish acted as currency, proving that maritime resources could independently catalyze urban complexity without the traditional agricultural surplus usually required to sustain such large populations. Yet this dependence on the sea carried an implicit fragility often overlooked in historical narratives of human progress. The entire civilization's stability hinged on the capricious behavior of ocean currents and El Niño events that could decimate fish stocks with terrifying speed, turning a feast into famine overnight despite their impressive engineering prowess. Some researchers speculate that this unique vulnerability shaped their cultural development, potentially fostering intense cooperation or ritual practices tied to predicting weather patterns rather than praying for rain alone. The ruins we see today stand as silent testimony to a bold experiment in human adaptation. They prove that humanity found multiple paths to complexity long before the standard historical script emerged. Aspero remains an enigmatic testament to how a culture could choose abundance from the deep blue over the predictable brown earth, building a legacy upon resources that were plentiful yet perilously transient. Before the great round platform of Aspero ever rose to meet the gaze of the heavens, it was first buried alive with secrets. Within its construction fill lay hidden caches that tell a story far more intimate than simple engineering permits suggest. Archaeologists have uncovered these deliberate deposits not as random trash heaps or accidental drops from building scaffolds, but as ritual dedications carefully placed during specific phases of erection. These offerings were interred with the intent to consecrate the structure before its final form was revealed to the world above. The contents of these graves speak of a society deeply connected to the land and the water that surrounded it. Among the most striking finds are thousands of unfired clay figurines, still soft in their original context yet hardened by time and burial. These were not intended for public display or export. They represent a moment frozen between creation and completion. Alongside these fragile terracotta beams lie fragments of ancient textiles and other ceremonial goods that have survived the erosion of centuries only because they were shielded beneath tons of earth, preserving a quiet testament to the labor and faith invested in this massive undertaking. Some researchers speculate that once the platforms were finished and dedicated to the gods or ancestors watching over Lake Supe, these buried offerings served as eternal anchors for the structure's spiritual power. To expose them would have been an act of desecration. Instead, they remain sealed within the foundation like sleeping guardians who witnessed the first sunrise seen from the peak. The air around the site feels heavy with unspoken history, not because of supernatural events involving lost races or extraterrestrial visitors, but simply due to the weight of a culture that understood their connection to nature on a profound level. Here, under layers of sediment and silence, the people who built Aspero left behind pieces of themselves in clay and fiber, ensuring that even if the world changed around them, they would never truly be forgotten by those willing to look closely at what was hidden beneath the soil. The massive stone platform at Aspero rises abruptly from the flat valley floor, its circular form creating a stark silhouette against the horizon that has fascinated observers for decades. While most archaeological consensus views it as an artificial island constructed to control water flow and protect fragile fishing grounds during seasonal floods, another perspective lingers in the quiet corners of Andean scholarship. Some researchers speculate that this deliberate geometry was not merely functional but also celestial, suggesting its orientation might have tracked specific stars or sunsets critical for local survival. The theory posits that the structure served as a fixed reference point against which the community could navigate the unpredictable rhythms of the Peruvian coast, aligning their calendar with the sky above to ensure successful harvests and safe fishing expeditions. However, this astronomical interpretation remains firmly in the realm of speculation rather than established fact within the broader field of archaeology. Unlike the well-documented ceremonial complexes at Caral or Satalhuruk, where celestial alignments are supported by extensive stratigraphic evidence and artifact distribution, Aspero offers no clear proof that its builders prioritized sky watching over hydrological engineering. The prevailing view among experts is pragmatic. The platform was built to raise living quarters above rising tides, a defensive measure against nature's volatility rather than an observatory for divine signs. Yet, one cannot entirely dismiss the possibility that Andean minds did not draw sharp lines between practical survival and spiritual observation, blending these concerns into structures that served multiple purposes in ways we may never fully reconstruct from stone alone. Despite the lack of definitive data confirming a calendrical function, the visual impact of standing on such an elevated ring remains undeniable, forcing any observer to look outward rather than inward. If the platform did hold astronomical significance, it would have anchored the community's perception of time and seasonality in a way that transcended simple utility, turning the landscape itself into a map written by the sun and moon. This possibility adds a layer of solemn mystery to the site, suggesting that the people who built these walls were not just managing water levels but perhaps measuring eternity against the horizon. Until new evidence emerges or carbon dating clarifies construction phases relative to known celestial cycles, this narrative must remain an open question, a shadowy hypothesis that invites continued inquiry without claiming certainty where none exists in the dusty silence of the Supe Valley. Now, the part historians won't confirm. Here's what if Aspero was never meant to be a standalone ceremonial center, but merely one terminal in a vast, invisible network spanning the Supe Valley? What if that perfect circle of polished limestone at its heart and the sealed stone chambers deep beneath Caral were not accidental or isolated traditions? Instead, imagine them as distinct components of a single deliberately distributed system engineered centuries ago to achieve something far grander than simple observation or burial. Some researchers speculate that these structures followed a rigid geometric protocol unknown to modern archaeology, where orientation and distance between sites encoded data regarding celestial cycles, water levels, and perhaps even social stratification. If this hypothesis holds true, then the platform in Aspero did not just watch the sky. It was synchronized with Caral's subterranean voids through an invisible thread of purpose that connected every major site along the valley floor into a cohesive whole designed to function as one organism rather than a collection of scattered ruins. The deliberate distribution implies a level of regional planning so advanced that our current understanding of Neolithic governance seems woefully incomplete. If two such different architectural forms, the open-air plaza and the sealed crypt, were part of the same blueprint, their combined purpose might have been to create a static map or library of sorts, physically embedding critical knowledge into the bedrock itself before any records could be written on perishable materials that long ago dissolved back into the earth. Like Caral centuries to the north, Aspero remains an active excavation site where fresh layers of history are still being uncovered by modern archaeologists. The vast platform rising from the Supe River estuary continues to yield pottery shards and organic debris that hint at a complex society far older than previously imagined. Yet, despite decades of intense study, its precise role within the broader network of Andean civilizations remains an open area of research. Some researchers speculate that it functioned primarily as a specialized fishing hub or perhaps a strategic military outpost controlling river access, while others suggest it served multiple overlapping purposes we have not yet fully decoded. The ground here does not offer easy answers. Instead, it presents a puzzle where the pieces do not quite fit into neat historical timelines any more than they ever will. The relationship between this artificial island and its surrounding settlements is equally elusive, obscured by silts that shift with every high season of rain. While we can trace trade routes leading inward toward the valleys and outward along the coast, the exact political or economic hierarchy connecting Aspero to nearby sites like Supe remains debated. Was it a capital city in waiting, a sacred sanctuary for coastal elites, or simply one node in a massive, decentralized web of interaction that predated written language by thousands of years? The silence of the ruins speaks volumes. Without contemporary texts to guide our interpretation, every conclusion drawn today is inherently provisional and subject to revision as new techniques allow us to see deeper into the earth. That closes the first 10 case files in this archive. Every door we open led to another one we couldn't fully close. The archive isn't finished, it's just where we stopped for now. If there's a door you think we missed, that's what the next batch is for. This series has only scratched the surface of Peru's ancient past, leaving behind questions as many as answers regarding these lost giants who built platforms without iron tools or written records. As our cameras roll on and fade to black over this enigmatic landscape, remember that history is not a static collection of facts but an ongoing conversation between the dead earth and living minds. We will return when new evidence forces us to rewrite what we thought we knew about humanity's earliest triumphs in the Americas.